All right. Well, thanks so much for coming out. How many people here listen to .NET Rocks? Awesome. Well, thank you for listening, for starters, and it's great to be back here. We're going to do what we call a top and tail show. So Carl's not here. So the way you'll actually hear this show published is that Carl and I will have a little intro. It's as if I carried this back from Bulgaria to the studio, although in reality I'll be in Vancouver and he'll be in New London. You just sound like we're together. We're not. And I'll talk about doing this panel discussion, and then we'll cut over to the actual discussion. There are going to be ad breaks inserted. We're just not actually going to do the ads. So you'll hear me say, can you just stop for a moment for this very important message? And that's what that's about. And so, yeah, if you've never seen a show made, you're watching the sausage get made. It's not as elegant as you'd hoped. We normally do, every show we make is edited. We go over pretty carefully. There's only so much I can do in a panel discussion with everybody together because their microphones crosstalk, but normally we would all be recorded in isolation, and I make anybody sound smart, even me, with good editing. But we have limits, and Sam, so there's only so much we can do. Okay, and here we are in Bulgaria at DevReach, the 10th DevReach in, I guess, roughly 12 years, because we didn't do it every year. And I have an esteemed panel to talk a little bit about mobile dev. And to make my life simpler and for everybody can hear your voices, let's go down the line and introduce yourself. Sam?
All right. Hey, I'm Sam Basu. I'm a developer advocate at Progress. I mostly deal with the .NET side of the family. And I speak and I write, and I am happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name's Jen Looper. I'm also a developer advocate at Progress. I'm working more on the NativeScript side, so the JavaScript to native product that we have, and I'm also the CEO of Vue Vixens, which is an initiative I founded within the Vue.js community. So very happy to be here.
Hey everybody, I'm Jo Franchetti. I am a developer advocate at Samsung Internet. My team really want to help all developers out there to make the web a better place to be.
Awesome. So, I mean, for better or worse, we have two Telerik folks on this panel, but you do come in it from different angles because you're very much a .NET sort of Xamarin guy, Sam.
Yep.
Okay, and then Jen's more on the NativeScript side, which is a whole other conversation, I'm sure. We'll have some fun with that. How are you feeling as folks who build stuff in the Xamarin space? How are you guys feeling about it? Like, how's Xamarin doing for you?
I think very, very good, because I think we are at an interesting juncture and things are going to evolve, but we're at a good place. I think if you're a .NET developer, the tools that we have to go build apps that are for mobile, doesn't need to be just apps, but something that is for mobile, the tools have matured, the ecosystem has matured a lot over the last couple of years.
The acquisition into Microsoft, it seems like it's stabilized the product.
That helped. And things are evolving on the Microsoft and Xamarin land, so it's all about code sharing.
Right.
Where can we take our code that is just for Xamarin now to other places, other platforms? So more and more platform support for Xamarin. And then if you look at the WebAssembly side of things, it's again the evolution of how we can reuse our code everywhere.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens with WebAssembly in a mobile context, because right now it seems very much like it's just for the PC building sort of enterprisey internal apps with no SEO capabilities of any kind, because the view source on a Blazor app is awesome. Here's the 15 DLLs, and that's about it.
Right. The lure is getting XAML back on the web, and if you can power the same web applications that work nicely on a mobile device with the same XAML and C# code base that you have, that's a win. So we'll see.
Yeah, the fragmentation of XAML, for better or worse, that's now become, the flavor that is WPF, the flavor that is UWP, and then there's Xamarin Forms, which is kind of a XAML, but it seems like different from everything else.
It is. So I think no one team at Microsoft really owns XAML over the years. It's a lightweight markup language, and everybody did their own thing.
I'm going to question the lightweight part, but okay.
And again, for better or worse, everybody did their own thing. Xamarin Forms is very much catering to the mobile form factor, but there have been efforts. They were trying to work on XAML standard, which would unify the dialect for all platforms, but it's an incredibly hard problem to solve. So we'll see eventually if it does become one dialect. But again, if you consider XAML now powering apps on Tizen and back on the web, there is a need for some better messaging that can take your XAML everywhere, and you still write the same XAML.
It occurs to me that if Joe works for Samsung, do you do the Tizen thing?
No operating system at all. My team is all web, sadly, so I can't be of any use there.
No, that's fine. I'm meaning to do a Tizen show one of these days. I have talked to a couple of devs that work in the space, but they mostly play Tizen against like televisions, and they say challenging development environment, like not a trivial thing. But when you talk about web for mobile, what are you talking about?
So when we talk about that, we're talking about apps in your browser.
Right.
So
PWA?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So something that my team is very, very keen on is, getting the message of how great PWAs are out there. We can build an app-like experience using the technologies that we already know and love. So your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, the things that we all sort of grew up learning. You can now make a sort of native-like experience using them.
It's nice. Are the browsers uniform enough that if I write a PWA, it works the same on Chrome on Android as it does the trouble child Safari on iOS?
Sure. So Safari have recently added support for service workers, so you will get your app working, in a native-like way. You won't get push notifications yet on Safari, but maybe.
I think Apple isn't wrong resisting push notifications. They're fairly awful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely on us as developers to
Stop abusing the toast.
Yes, exactly. Have a little bit of responsibility for our actions there with regards to all notifications and any kind of permissions, in fact.
I don't know that we're at a time in the mobile model yet where you can actually really, right now you give the permissions at the beginning of the app before you've done anything. I would love for us to get to a place where only when you went to utilize a feature would it say, hey, to use this feature, I now need access to the camera.
Absolutely.
And only take it then. And if you don't want to give you access to the camera, then I don't do it. The fact that I have to, the first time I install the app, agree, you get all the, I want access to your Twitter account and your contacts and all those requests right up front, whether you use the feature or not.
And the danger with PWAs is, maybe somebody's been linked there from a URL. They don't even know who you are yet. And you're suddenly like, can we know your location? And they're like, I don't even know what you do.
Yeah. So I'm thinking no. And some apps at that point literally bail. It's like, well, if I can't have what I want, I'm going home.
You're getting nothing. Here's a wall of text.
I'm pouting, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we all as developers need to start thinking about, acting well with regards to asking for permissions, thinking about how many permissions we need to actually ask for upfront.
I think you can have a little bit better user experience within a mobile app by, having an onboarding screen going on, and then you're offered a button, would you like to sign up for push notifications at that moment?
Right.
Which doesn't really answer the question of when the permissions are actually set, but at least there's the feeling that you're opting in. So that's
Well, isn't this really an architectural issue that we have a manifest that demands a set of permissions that basically add install? It says, you're going to grant all these, right? Or we don't get to play. It's basically they've managed to turn that permission set into a EULA, right?
Yeah. Except nobody can read it.
Everybody has to click OK on the EULA before they get to use the app. Sometimes they make you scroll to the bottom of the nightmare and then click OK. But you certainly don't read it. You haven't really agreed to it. You've just sort of said, what do I have to do to proceed? And now they've done the same. The permission model, in my mind, is the same.
Yeah, and it's got into a really dangerous place where we're almost training our users to just say yes to things.
I think you're being way too kind, Joe. We have trained them. It has worked remarkably well. And the sheer volume of problems that are caused because people are dialogue blind. Look for the button that means proceed. Is it a right arrow? Is it an OK? Is it an I agree? I don't care. Just make it go. Can we make a piece of software that just clicks those buttons automatically? The I agree button, tool, because they're making us into that tool by the way that they present this information.
Well, the number of people who are now asking browsers to, include interfaces that help them manage permissions, it's something that users really want. And in fact, it's something that Firefox are turning on. You can block any websites from even being allowed to show permissions.
Wow.
That's cool. That's interesting. And I'm very excited about Tim Berners-Lee's initiative, the Solid and Incept.
I've not heard of this.
Oh, so go. Our buddy TBL, you know, the reason we're all here, has decided he wants us to take back the ownership of our data. And he's going to try. I mean, he's not the only one who's trying, but it's Tim Berners-Lee.
Yeah.
So, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So I hope he succeeds. I'm in for whatever he's making. But yeah, this idea, I mean, I've read enough now that I'm sort of in the place of, all right, so I have a bunch of the idea that I can grant time-limited permissions to a site or to an app, I think is a cool idea.
Yes,
All we got to do is
definitely.
get people to actually do it. I'm going to pause just for a moment for this really important message. And we're back. It's Richard Campbell here in Bulgaria at DevReach. We've got an esteemed panel of mobile dev folks, Sam Basu, Jen Looper, and Joe, did I get your last name right? Is it
Franchetti.
Franchetti, just like it's spelled. And we haven't talked about NativeScript, so I feel bad.
That's okay.
Jen, what is it you do?
Oh, I'm a developer advocate, so that means that basically I travel all over the world and meet people, which is fun. But I also get to talk about a product that I'm really passionate about, which is NativeScript. And I've been a mobile developer ever since my little iPhone 4. So this little device, I fell in love with it. I started building.
I think that was the first great iPhone. Because
Yeah.
the first couple were just not that good.
Yeah,
But
it was-
iPhone 4 was a moment.
It was that moment where I got my first, this thing, and you start realizing, you could maybe make an app, and that would be
Yeah.
really cool. So, first app I made with Objective-C, and then I discovered Corona SDK. And once you start getting into these projects like Corona SDK, you start realizing that maybe you could design for, iOS and Android, and this opened up a whole new world. So we have such a solution here at Progress, and which is called NativeScript. And with NativeScript, you're writing JavaScript, and which with a framework such as Angular or Vue.js, or no framework at all. So we give our developers some choices, and then they're able to write apps for iOS and Android. And it's a very fun thing.
The thing that I find fascinating is there are so many choices now if you want to build for the mobile form factor, but despite the choices, there's a surprising amount of clarity as to how you go about it. If you want to do .NET and if you want to stay in Visual Studio all day, go do Xamarin.
Right.
If
And
you-
C# makes you happy.
Exactly.
Right? That's a non-trivial number of people.
Right. And if you are rather invested in the web stack, go do JavaScript native or you do PWAs. It's
Right.
surprisingly simple, and it's all. I think it comes down to code sharing. What else do you have? Because you're not just making a mobile app. How else can you share your assets between your web, desktop, and mobile apps?
I think that the waters are can get a little bit muddied when you throw in hybrid into the solution. So we get a lot of questions working a booth. What's the difference between NativeScript and something like Cordova? And you start having to explain what's going on here.
Do you remember when
So-
Cordova was PhoneGap and this was just
Phone
supposed
Gap?
to be a
I've been to
temporary
Phone Gap
thing?
Day. It was awesome.
Yeah, but I love the sentiment. We did shows back then. It's like, hey, while HTML5 isn't good enough yet, here is a way for us to bridge the gap.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
HTML5 is pretty good now, and PhoneGap doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's still a pretty productive way to build software.
Yeah, it is, and there are products built on top of it that are amazing. There's Ionic, there's other really great, solutions. It's just something that, I wouldn't say evolved, but the whole aspect of developing for mobile can be, kind of clarified and changed as soon as you go into JavaScript native. So it's kind of the next generation after the Cordova solution.
I think the way I see it is with the same technologies, if you can make a native app, why would you make a hybrid app?
Yeah, as long as the real question is how much repeated work am I doing, and am I getting a good enough experience on the device?
Yeah, that's the kicker.
Yeah, I think it's a challenging one, but for better or worse, like JavaScript kind of wins in this space. It's
It
the
does.
most native option. Even if let me throw you another way. Why would you build an app? Why not just stick with web mobile?
Well, if you've already got a website, then why not make it a PWA and you're pretty much already there.
Right.
I mean, with a small bit of extra JavaScript and your JSON file, the website that you already have can and probably should be a PWA.
Yeah, well,
in my
and
opinion.
at least if you're consumer facing, that's the majority of your customers are coming that way. And if I just throw the manifest in, now it's an icon on a phone.
Yeah.
Like, should I, what's the justification for doing more than that?
I'm actually curious, and I would love to do some usability studies for PWAs. I think of someone like my dad with his Android, and he deals with a few downloaded apps that we helped him download. And I just wonder, when he hits such a website and he sees that pop up I'd like to download an icon, I think he's going to freak out. So I wonder what like the elder population is going to feel about this sort of thing, and how it'll be kind of adopted. It'll be really interesting to watch.
So it's another thing that I think is really important, similar to the permissions. Like we shouldn't be offering that download to home screen pop-up until the user's maybe visited multiple times or spent a large amount of time on the app, so that there's engagement here, they might want to come back. Now we offer them the ability to actually, take that engagement to their home screen.
And
That's a
because it
great
is a
idea.
website, you absolutely have that choice. Like until someone's actually
Absolutely.
set up, I would think you'd do it in the account creation process, where you've cared enough for now to give me your personal information and get set up with an account. Now it's like, hey, would you like this to just appear as an icon? And well, then click on this. Your phone's going to ask you if this is okay. This is what we're doing.
Yeah,
That's a
absolutely.
good idea. I like
Wrap
that.
it in something friendly
Yeah, for sure.
or friendlier.
Yeah, something digestible.
Yeah, it's always a challenge there. But I feel like I chucked hybrid under the bus.
I mean, it is still a legit strategy if you're building line of business apps, I think. And again, I mean, with hybrid apps, you could get some code reusability on the web. But again, I mean, if you could, with just a little bit more effort, make a native app, and you get the native experience close to the metal, maybe why would you?
And when you say native app, are you still meaning Xamarin? Or
No, and I do
Could
mean
be, could
Xamarin,
be.
Right.
but
Or any
the
of these
JavaScript
millions of
native
other
side of
options.
things,
Right.
which is NativeScript, React Native, because you are sharing code with your web and your mobile.
Right. So, I think, Joe, you said it very well about why I would build a PWA is you have a website, it's where your customer's already going, make
Right.
sure it works well on the phone. I think, Sam, maybe what you're saying is you have an app, you wrote it in C#, it has a back end, people want it on their phone.
Right, right. And that's a great use case because you likely already have investments in desktop and
Right.
in web. And again, I mean, it kind of goes back to what your stack looks like. Because a lot of enterprises who have traditionally been .NET shops now are happy to do Angular as part. Maybe .NET is your backend.
Right.
And then maybe you don't want to do C# and .NET. Maybe it's okay for you to go the JavaScript route for sharing code between web and mobile.
If you've already done it, or if you're thinking, I want to do something different on the client going forward.
Right. If you are starting to think about what else can I do,
I want to
how
get
else-
off a desktop
Right,
client.
right. Now, again, I mean, having said that, the desktop story is also evolving. We all know about .NET Core. .NET Core has come along a long way in the last 2-3 years.
Yep.
And then we can look ahead at .NET Core 3, which brings that goodness back to the desktop. So with a .NET standard DLL, you can actually reuse a lot of code between desktop and even mobile.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if that's actually true.
Yeah, we'll see.
we at Build, I had an opportunity to interview Mads Torgerson and Scott Hunter at Beth Massey, and one of the conversations was that they had been prototyping a WinForms implementation that handled high DPI screens, and it simply, you couldn't just port your code across. Like, there were issues every time. And so, one of the things they were talking about in the context of .NET 3 and this idea of a Windows-specific SDK that works against .NET 3 was that, yeah, it's code-compatible WinForms, but you better do some testing because it is the high DPI one. It's going to behave differently.
Early days, but again, I think .NET standard is a big step in the right direction.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that for sure. It certainly helped us over. I got to think from a Telerik perspective, a progress perspective, the fact that you know that if your tools are compliant with standard, then anybody who's working in any of these things that also use standard, it's just going to work.
Yes.
Like that to me is a huge amount of pain relieved for you, and certainly for your customers too.
Right.
I still wrestle a bit with how exactly the native script part plays. So you're basically compiling JavaScript into native code.
That's right. So you're writing, your entire application in JavaScript,
Right.
With or without a framework, and then you're leveraging the JavaScript runtimes to compile to native. So it's a runtime. It's a little bit different from the React Native bridge. It's slightly different concepts of doing basically the same thing. So we're just leveraging JavaScript and porting over to native. So it's a really nice solution when you need that downloaded mobile app.
Right.
And I always think of things like, using plugins and this sort of thing to get that native experience, when you need your accelerometer or when you need very special, situations that certain apps need. And the other thing that comes to mind for a reason why you might need a downloadable mobile app is for monetization
Right.
strategies. So, at some point you're going to have to deal with the App Store and with Google Play
Yeah.
so that your customers can access. I think it's very interesting to watch how monetization has changed. It used to be that the indie developer could, release a paid mobile app and you'd make a decent amount of money. That's completely gone.
The
sadly.
99-cent app model just doesn't work anymore.
Sadly, it
No,
doesn't.
it's really interesting that that's true. That model. It's 99 cents, man. You just dropped $4.50 on a latte.
I had an app for $4.99. I did pretty well for a little while.
I'll admit this, and actually, my wife happens to be traveling with me this week, so you guys have actually met her. I bought her an iPad specifically for coaching curling, because the best curling coaching app in the world is iPad specific and $100.
Oh my.
Wow.
And it was in the store. So I dropped $100 on an app
On
for
an
an
app?
iPad,
Wow. Somebody-
which she used. Like it was.
It better be a good app.
It's
I'm
a
assuming
pro
it's a great app.
and I sort of understood why he was making money off of that. But it's like there's only so many people who need a curling coaching app, but those who need it really need it, and it was worth the $100.
Yeah.
It was a Christmas present.
I mean, the gaming industry will always have these downloadables that will make a certain amount of money.
Sure.
But for the rest of us who had, your basic Ionic app or your basic NetScript app, and you try to charge $1 for it, it's just,
It's
not gonna
yeah,
happen.
and it's just $1. It's very interesting that that's actually broken. Okay, let's break there. This is the mid-body break now, and so this is actually where Carl will tell a joke, and there'll be a thing, and then we insert an ad and so forth, and it finishes with we do a $5,000 giveaway, and then and then I'll transition back to me where I'm like, all right, and I get a chance to ask all of you, what would you do with $5,000? Sam, any thoughts?
Okay, so maybe not directly computer related, but I think we are finally ready for electric cars.
Well, there's been Teslas for a
Yeah.
while.
I may not be buying a Tesla, but I'm so happy that Elon and his team did what they did because it's
Yes.
making everybody else sit up and do stuff.
Yeah, and,
You
and
see-
that was always his intent. Right?
Exactly, and you see BMWs, Mercedes, and Audis, everybody making electric cars. So I know it takes a little bit of prep, but I would like to get ready for it, kind of get my garage ready so I can have that high voltage.
The fast charger.
Yeah, the
That'll
super
burn.
fast
That can
chargers.
burn $5,000, especially if you need to run some wires from the basement and things. Because who has a dryer outlet in their garage, right?
The garage.
So looking forward, that will be a good investment because then
Mm-hmm.
we can just go all electric.
I'll tell you, I have a neighbor, or I have a buddy, who lives in a condo complex and couldn't get the condo complex to put a. You've got the same problem,
Same
Jen?
situation.
Yeah.
We got a
and he's ended up.
townhouse, yeah.
So then he discovered that there was a hotel like a block away that charged $6 for night parking on the electric charger. And so what he started doing was he'd pay the $6, he'd put it on the charger when he got home from work, then do his evening stuff, right? And then at night, after everything's done, before he goes to bed, he walks the dog back to the car, which is now charged, drives it back, puts it in his own space. That's the end of his night. So it's sort of that $6 every other day kind of thing. So he's at the point where he's like, I'm just not going to put the charger into my place. Like, why even have this fight anymore? I don't care. Between his work, where he gets superior parking because of the electric plug, and that hotel, he's set. Jen, $5,000. What do you spend it on?
So we just actually did spend about $5,000 to buy a kind of the opposite extreme, a 2005 vintage Mustang pony package.
Wow.
Drop top, purrs like a panther for my daughter. So she's driving Charlie, her new car.
What year?
2005, about 100 and something thousand miles on it. So it's a lot, but
Is that a Mustang 2? Or no, that's the 3. It was the early versions of the new model.
probably because
Yeah.
it looks a lot like my husband's GT. But yeah, so I'm the Prius driving mom, and we kind of balance each other out in terms of environmental
You're the Prius
damage.
driving mom, and then there's 2 Mustangs?
And there's 2 Mustangs. so
Okay,
we're
now
kinda, yeah.
that's a thing.
But yeah, it's amazing what you can do for 5,000.
I was going to think you just bank that on gas, right?
Yeah.
It's got the 6 in it, I presume.
She's going to be babysitting. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
That is one
For
lucky
gas money.
daughter that you
Yeah.
have.
Joe?
So for me, I would really love to buy a VR rig for my living room.
Yeah, and that's a good $5,000 easy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If you go all out, right, like that, you'll. Are you more of a Vive or an Oculus?
So I've tried the Vive and really enjoyed it.
Right.
The problem being the the needing to set up all the different sensors around your room. I had a go of an Oculus Go the other day, and that was really fun. The
Yeah.
sort of the freedom that gives you. So yeah, I'm not sure what is actually top of the market at the moment, but
Yeah, it seems like it's just very much personal opinion things about for Oculus. They seem to be the two, one way or the other.
yeah,
But it's more the machine that drives it these days.
right.
And basically you need a 1080, and that's $1,000. Oh, that's 20 or the 2080 if you really want to spend money. No, I think you guys have burned through the money just fine. Well done. Great set of choices. I appreciate that. Sometimes it's hard on folks. What would you do with gadgets? And this show's coming out in December. I don't know exactly when, so it's around the time we do the drawing. And fairly consistently, it's been a dev rig that people have. When actually
Right.
confronted, it's, who knows, I'd love to have somebody do something really crazy. I don't know. But the Oculus rig would be cool. Let's dive back into this. Can we talk about how awful app stores are?
Oh, yes. I've been doing this for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And it's a nightmare every time, and it keeps changing. Just when you think you got it down,
Right.
I used to have a really good system of doing my screenshots, and you make them look fancy, and then you worry about the icon. It has to be designed very carefully. Upload all that stuff, and then you do it again for Google Play.
Right.
So that's the one thing that we really can't get right cross-platform, sadly.
So the software could be cross-platform, but your actual
Yeah.
descriptions and how you present it in the store.
Yeah, it's like a marketing package you have to put together. I mean, I used to make a website as well for each of my apps. That needs to have a press package as well. So there's just a huge amount. For a solid app release in the app stores, you need to really think it through and get all those assets really, really tight.
I'd love to run down this with you just a bit. So what goes into that app submission piece?
Okay. So assuming that you've managed to get your provisioning profile, so I'm primarily iOS, so
Right.
provisioning profile nightmare, get that all set up, get your app compiled and uploaded into the App Store with whatever version you want. At that point, you need to also have a nice icon designed, and this is very, very important to get it right. I see a lot of mistakes around this area. You also need to get your screenshots, about 5, and they need to be scaled. So you need to do them for your iPhone, you do it again for your iPad. Make sure
Right.
it's right if you're releasing for iPad. And then you need to be very, very careful about the title of your app. You can go onto App Annie and look for keywords and make sure.
And what are you looking for? That somebody else is already using that name?
Well, yeah, you have to make sure that you don't step on someone else's name, but you won't be able to submit such a thing. They'll flag you right
it'll
away.
kick
It'll
back.
kick back, yeah.
Okay.
It used to be that you could stuff a bunch of keywords into your title. They
Oh.
stopped us from doing that, so it was like all the tricks and crazy things we used to try to do. So short title, concise, but then there's a description that you have to fill out with keywords.
Right.
You need to be very, very careful to get those right.
Yeah.
So
This is how people are going to find your app amongst the literal millions?
bazillions of apps. So I had an app called the Roomalizer, which was you would take a photograph, a picture of a room, and then you could paint and add details and drop plants. It was really early days. Now they do it really nicely with like IKEA and VR and AR.
Sure.
But this was kind of not very exciting Corona SDK app, and I happened to get one keyword right by accident, and I managed to sell that app for $1,500 because
Wow.
somebody wanted it. So these kind of things, that was a total accident. But if you do it right, you can actually. That's the other way of monetizing your apps: build it and sell it.
Build it and sell it to someone who wants to give it away because it sells a product or a service of theirs.
Then you need to think about localizing. So if you want to release in markets that are of interest to you, so for a lot of games, you might want to release in South Korea. So I
Right.
tend to do cute games for kids, very popular in South Korea. So you want to get that all localized, including the app. So under the icon, there's the little name of the app on your phone.
Right.
That needs to be localized as well. So you have to be very, very careful and get
In
this all
Korean.
right in Korean. So
Where did
everything.
you get translation services done?
You can. There's. I'm so cheap. I could go to Fiverr.com.
Right.
For $5, you can
$5,
get, yeah.
somebody will translate paragraph for you, that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
beware, because they'll go straight to Google Translate and it'll be a hot mess. So you need to have Korean friends.
Nice.
So
Well, I guess the smart thing to do if you're going to do that is first run it through Google Translate so you know what you don't want.
exactly, yeah. So we learned these things the hard way. I ran the Russian translations that came back for one of my apps via my Russian friend, and she's like,
This is not
no,
Russian.
This is not right.
Yeah,
So
no, that's-
it was a
that's-
fitness app, so you had to be careful.
Yeah, I know. I think words are really challenging for
Yeah.
that.
And these are difficult problems to solve no matter how you build your app. Like,
Yeah,
look at
this is not a
cross
technology
technologies.
problem,
No,
but it is
No, this
part
is
of
marketing.
living
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
world.
Sales
yeah.
and marketing.
And
So
your discoverability is going to suck because you just have so many apps. But
Yeah.
again, enterprises do want to have that app store presence and we can see that.
If the app is B2C, right? Like if you want the customer to have
absolutely,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then for Google Play, there's a whole different strategy. You have to have a marketing image. So it's so you have to put together, something that looks nice. That's not a screenshot. So there's just a lot going on for each of these specific platforms.
And then a press back?
I used to do a website for each of my apps. So I have an app called Practice Buddy for students of music and their teachers, and I had a little press package that went with it in case somebody wanted to interview you, send them to the website, they can get information. So it's all the sales and marketing stuff that people don't think about. They're like, yay, I'm going to release an app. Hold on, there's so much more.
Right.
So
I
it's
think
interesting.
I think tooling can help a little bit.
On the marketing side?
No, just the app publication side.
Sure.
If you look at what the Xamarin folks,
Yeah.
James and Miguel, we have David Ortner here
Yeah.
who's the PM for Xamarin Forms. They are trying. They're not quite there yet, but they're trying that if you're in Visual Studio, you should be able to provision your iOS device and eventually be able to push from Visual Studio itself.
Yeah.
And I think that experience is something they have tried refining over
And we
time.
have Sidekick here internally. We
Right.
have Sidekick. You can handle some provisioning profiles. You can actually scale get your icons sorted out and scale some assets within these tools that some companies provide as
Or
well.
you can build a PWA and skip
Yeah.
this whole step.
Quite.
But this is the fun part.
Well,
The downside of not being in the App Store then is that you're never going to be found in search. Or can you still go into the App Store with a PWA?
so you absolutely can. And Microsoft have actually built a really great tool called PWA Builder, which you can run your PWA through, and it'll do the packaging for you for different stores. Microsoft are actually really keen to get PWAs into their app store, so they have actually spoken about building a crawler. So if your PWA is out there on the web and they find it and they consider it to be a quality PWA,
Right.
so you really have to have worked on your accessibility, on your performance, made the app a really great app. But if they find it and they consider it a quality PWA, then they will automatically put it in the Windows App Store, which I think is amazing.
That
Can
is
you,
awesome.
can you put such a thing in an iOS App Store yet, a PWA?
I think you have to do some packaging of it in order to get it into the iOS App Store. But
Oh, interesting.
And Google obviously are very
Yeah.
keen for PWAs. So
Makes
there's
sense.
a lot.
I think the Microsoft store is really well flushed out because the UWP store, they want those apps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have a PWA, it's a nicer experience, kind of hooking into the Windows notifications and the Windows permission systems, and then get that app in the store.
And then, of course, you've got the ability for it to work as a desktop experience as well as your mobile experience. And yeah,
That's true. We sometimes actually forget, like, UWP just works everywhere.
Does it?
And
Does
yeah,
it
well,
really? Universal as long as it's Windows.
Exactly, but within the Windows system, even if you have a PWA, if you can get it into the UWP store,
Yeah.
then it works on tablets and it works on a HoloLens.
As long as
I
they're,
mean,
yeah.
Right.
Both
Would be
guys who
tooling.
have HoloLenses are very excited.
The two guys.
We are so brutally overdue for a hardware refresh
Yes,
on the
we are.
HoloLens
Yes,
side.
we are.
Like, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. I'm so frustrated. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what happens to UWP considering how Microsoft has reorganized Windows. I don't think we've really seen what that model looks like going forward yet. But I mean, I know that you guys being Telerik or /Progress or Progress/Telerik have a non-trivial commitment into the UWP space. Like, you guys have built great tools.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we are keeping a very close eye on things and
Sure.
how evolve. If you look at if you are kind of invested in UWP XAML, again, the 5 folks who are, Uno is wonderful.
Yeah, and we did a great show with the Uno guys. They were amazing.
So now you can take pure UWP XAML. They kind of run it through Mono anyways.
Yep.
But then you can put it in iOS and Android. But then that lights up, like our UWP suite is completely open source. So now you can use the same .NET-ish controls to light up iOS and Android apps,
Right.
which is a nice story. Again, it does work on the Surface hubs, on HoloLenses. So I think UWP is here to stay. What we will see is how the Xamarin story flushes into it.
Merges into
Yeah,
that one way or the other.
Yeah.
I'm also really interested in this. Once upon a time, you needed to make your iPhone app look like an iPhone app and your Android app look like an Android app, and then Facebook's like, no, it looks like a Facebook app. And I see more corp app builders saying, no, same experience on every device. Opinions?
I do have opinions on that because people are throwing material design all over creation.
Yes.
Somebody said recently that material design is the new Bootstrap, and that's kind of
That's
harsh.
Google's.
It's harsh, and I'm a GDE, so I
Yeah, you're not happy.
But yeah, it didn't happen. But I don't love to see material design in an iOS app. For me, it still feels a little strange.
Yeah, it's a foreigner.
Yeah, it's a little intrusive. But everyone has their own opinions on this. I don't think that's just
There's
my
one right
opinion.
way.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I mean, if you have an app.
Android guy?
No, iOS guy.
Oh, iOS.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, you don't need to be a Facebook or a PayPal to have the consistent experience everywhere.
Sure.
Even if you're building a line of business app, you will want users to have the same experience everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have been having iOS versus Android conversations for a decade now. I mean, I think people are used to their own like peculiarities, but let apps be apps and let the experience shine
But
through.
it's the same experience, but that's a custom experience. It's not just taking a Google thing and throwing it onto something else.
Make it run on an
So,
iOS
yeah.
thing. I mean, for the most part, games are uniform across the platforms.
Yep.
They
They have to be, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's just the nature of games where they take over the entire UI stack.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just interesting that we have, and then you have a few, let's call them sovereign apps or marquee apps that, again, uniform UXs. And then a certain class where they're supposed to be platform specific.
Yeah, like the Fidelity app is one of the most beautiful banking apps, and Bank of America is awesome too. And I'm pretty sure that the experience is extremely similar across platforms.
Right.
Yeah.
But they are still using the UX, the symbology of each platform.
So
Well, and some of the native tech does that kind of automatically, right? Xamarin was good for this with Xamarin Forms. They-
Yeah.
One set of code, more or less, looked native to each of the platforms.
NativeScript has their own module library, so we have about 70-something modules. So you can have, your action bar is going to look completely different by default on
Right.
Android and iOS, and then you can style it so it's all similar. But
I find it interesting how similar NativeScript and Xamarin are. Although
Yeah.
they come to it from two completely different
Completely
angles.
different
well, it's a
ends.
team though.
Same exact thing. And in fact, yes. I mean,
DNA of a company.
the folks who build out NativeScript, some of the tooling, they came from a .NET and the XAML background, so you
Right.
can kind of see that
The markup is
similarity.
similar,
Yeah, the
yeah.
markup is very similar. But again, pick your poison, .NET or JavaScript, and
Right.
then you get to arrive at a native mobile app.
Yeah, I just still feel like there's so many choices. It's almost frustrating.
Bewildering
Like,
sometimes, yeah. It's hard to explain sometimes.
I
Well-
like how like the Xamarin folks have always defined native versus everything else.
Right.
Native UI, native API access, and native performance. And some of it, maybe the performance part is debatable, but you have to have native
Sure.
UI at least. That's what makes it a native app. And then, I mean, every technology stack will give you complete native API access nowadays, so that's not the big issue.
Right.
Is your UI truly native to that platform?
We are sort of hitting a point where we're built out now. Like once upon a time, PhoneGap's claim to fame was it was going to give you access to the services inside of the phone that HTML certainly couldn't, or JavaScript certainly couldn't at the time, but that time appears to have passed.
Yeah, web APIs are giving us access to nearly all of the things that you can get with native now.
Sure.
I mean, okay, so we don't have access to your contacts, but that's probably a good thing.
Web
I think.
Bluetooth, and yeah.
It seems to be, there's not a ton good to say about Windows Phone, but they really kicked it on contacts. I still miss that. And generally the UI, the total lack of phones and complete lack of support, don't miss that very much at all. But I just switched to a Pixel 3 and my contacts still aren't right yet. It's one of the, you're just going to have to fuss with it.
I spent a few years with Windows Phone. It was a beautiful user experience.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
sad.
true.
It was a lovely
Yeah, it was
device
nice.
that just never went anywhere it needed to go, for better or worse. I'm not bitter. I'm a little bitter. Joe mentioned this very casually, and I want to spend a little time on it, accessibility. Building mobile stuff for folks that have different capabilities. What do you do?
Well, the joy of PWAs is that we have all of the built-in accessibility that comes with
browsers.
HTML.
Right, right.
I mean, there's so many good things in there, especially with HTML5. If you're building a quality piece of HTML, then the accessibility is already there.
Just built in.
Yeah, you're using the right elements. You're making hopefully accessible choices.
And that is a good point because, again, you don't have to do it all by hand.
Right.
If you're making a PWA with tools that are nice, like we make a Kendo UI, which is a JavaScript tooling, and if you use some of our UI, the accessibility part is built in. So it kind of goes back to how is it that you're building your app? What's your stack? And so maybe you don't have to do everything by hand.
Yeah, and we talked about native elements, but native elements in the browser are so well tested and so well understood by everybody. You have that completely accessible element there ready and waiting for you to use.
Nice. No, I think it knocks a big chunk of it. But in the non-PWA world, when you start building real mobile apps, are there libraries? Like, what do you have to do?
There are. I'm not an expert on accessibility, actually. So
It's a very challenging area.
it is, and it's something I'd like to explore more. I believe there are standard ways of doing it, and that you can certainly do with something like NativeScript. I always kind of would start with accessibility, looking at things like color, and watching for colorblind situations. So start from there, and then work your way into the true accessibility. This is skating on top of my knowledge.
Yeah, colorblindness, ability to scale, like all of those vision options, the spoken word features for other vision issues. But yeah,
But things like form design, I think there's quite complicated things that we need to pay attention to.
scaling. Yeah, I'm telling you, at 50, I miss a lot more clicks these days than I used to.
And swiping,
Yeah,
and
just
pinch and
it's-
zoom.
And I can just see anybody who has, challenge hitting that screen precisely enough. I'd really like you to be able to scale, make
I think
things a little bigger.
it's extremely useful just to watch older people use your apps.
Yeah.
It's just so useful.
We did we did a show a while ago on testing in the mobile space, and one of the things they were doing was they were turning on the camera to watch the user's expressions while they were using the app. Like, you learn so much about their level of frustration by how they look.
Yeah.
What do you guys do for testing?
Testing. Are you talking about testing?
Testing your app, like quality before you ship. User testing is an aspect of it. Like, there's a lot of testing. Is a big area.
And I think testing is only a small slice of it, because mobile is hard. Making
All
a
of it.
true mobile app it's a big life cycle.
Yeah.
You have to have DevOps, you have to have testing, you have to have usability, and you have to have analytics. And all of those things is like a huge gamut of things.
Sure.
Some of it comes bundled in. Microsoft has a very nice story with Visual Studio App Center. Some of the testing is kind of built in. Xamarin used to have, and it still is a part of App Center now, they had a lab in Boston where you could actually run your app on real devices, literally 2,000 devices.
Yeah, it's Xamarin Test Labs.
Xamarin Test.
Those are amazing.
Test Studio. And it's still there, it's part of App Center, because, especially on Android, you're not going to be able to test your app on every device. They will actually ship your app and run it with little cameras mounted on top.
Watching each of the devices.
Exactly, and then they'll give you screenshots. So
Yeah.
some of those things are hard to pull off if you're indie, but if you are really making a production line of business app, use some of these tools which can help.
And I didn't even know that just making a mobile website to have it actually look at all the renderings on all the devices. I think is pretty valuable.
That was my issue back in the day when I was working at a smaller company. But I was lucky enough, since I'm based in Boston, I had access to a company, Filament Group. They have an open device library, so they had maybe 50 different types of phones that you could go and pull up your website and just check.
Right.
So I went through and just screenshotted everything, and it's kind of horrifying, what you're trying to. But it's really it's labor intensive and brutal.
But there are so many great tools
Yeah.
built into the browsers now.
Yeah.
You can throttle your bandwidth right down. You can change the CPU of the phone.
Sure.
There are all sorts of audits that you can run in the browsers these days. Chrome is only one of them. Like Firefox has got some great tools.
Yeah.
Even
I've always
Edge has.
loved web page tests for, okay, let's see
Yes.
what it's like for someone from India accessing this on a iPhone 4, and it would show you the rendering times, and you're like, okay, that's tough. Like,
Absolutely.
And then
200 millisecond ping times have consequences.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love all these tools, and I think it's really important that we do the testing, but it doesn't replace actually getting a slow device on
Yeah.
a slow connection and actually feeling that frustration yourself. I think it's so important that developers get that experience so they can understand what they're doing to their users.
Yeah.
Well, how often do you go to a physical device while you're building your software, or versus an emulator?
I think it should be done early and often.
Early and often?
Yeah, I think
because it
that-
is a slower cycle.
Well, we have some really great tooling around that.
Yeah.
We have new hot module replacement, and you can be working, right on your phone. We have a
That's
NativeScript
Webpack,
Playground.
right?
Yeah, it's leveraging Webpack, and or you could just tether your phone in and then just run as you go.
Right.
So we have live sync, and we have now hot module replacement in NativeScript, so you can really get that fast cycle going. and that's really, really helpful. I was just going to mention about testing. As you're developing, you can always set up unit tests. In Java, since we're in the JavaScript world, we can use some of those, Mocha and Jest and those sort of things
Right.
as we go. So that's a useful tool set to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Or you can
absolutely.
just ship to prod, not test, but we don't do such things.
All software gets tested. It's just a question of whether it first gets tested on the customer.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not. It's, looking at Windows lately, near as I can tell, that's how Microsoft's doing it these days. So, ship it. See how loud the screams
How
are.
it goes.
Yeah, I'm absolutely appreciative of that. We're coming to the end of our time here. Any questions from the audience? What haven't we talked about today? And if you call it out, I'll have to repeat it. Make sure we have it on the show. No. All right. Well, let's have a hand for our panelists then. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. Works.
That's cool.